Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about how you can make time and expense entry easy and effective for everyone in your organization in Dynamics GP. Today we have joining us Brian Maxin, who is our Director of Sales here at Journyx, and Meredith Zachritz, who will be starting things off today, and she's our Director of Product Management. We also have with us today Sandra Dodge, who is the Senior Financial Reporting and Systems Manager at Iridium, and she is a customer of Journyx, and she is also a user of GP, and specifically had a problem around Business Portal that she is going to be talking about today. And just to let you know, if we have some time at the end, we will be taking some questions from attendees. So if you do have questions, go ahead and put those into the questions box in the GoToWebinar portal. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Meredith, and she's going to kick things off.
Thanks, Carrie. In order to make time and expense tracking effective and easy, it's important first to understand why you're tracking that time in the first place, and of course then what you need to do with that information that you collect. There are a lot of reasons that organizations track time and work-related expenses. Some need the data for fairly limited purposes, but others need that data for a variety of competing uses. And that can make it difficult to design a process that is both complete and simple. So some of the common reasons that people track time include monitoring project status and profitability. So the time worked against a project plan, is an important part of keeping a project on track in terms of budgets and deadlines. We also have project-related resource availability and capacity planning. So you have to determine which resources are available to work on new projects, and you have to plan for future resource capacity, and that's key to project completion and delivery. Automating payroll is a big thing because payroll automation in these days is really necessary in order to get people paid on time and, of course, reduce that expensive corrections process that's required for future periods. We also have billing verification in some cases for customer invoices. So obviously, it's very important that time worked against a customer project, as well as any expenses that might be passed along. You've got to make sure that those are tracked so that they get into the invoice for accurate invoicing. But then you also have follow-up when customers may be asked for some type of verification or audit information for those billed amounts. And then finally, you've got regulatory and maybe some contract-based compliance that you need to worry about. And that can be from, DCAA issues, Affordable Care Act, Sarbanes-Oxley requirements, to more custom contractual obligations, but organizations need records to show that they're in compliance with the rules of the game. So once your organization has a pretty good understanding of why time data is important for you, it'll be easier to implement your timesheet solution in a way that makes sense to all your employees. And it'll also be easier to get buy-in from everyone, that tracking this data is going to provide valuable resources for improving your business. So problem is, even if it's great to have time data, no one likes to track their time. So what do we do about that? There are really three key areas that you need to make sure you have covered in order to ensure that your employees accept the new process and get their timesheets done well. First, you'll need to pitch the value of using the new system. In other words, you need to help make sure that everyone understands how the data that they're tracking is going to help the company do a better job. Next, you also have to make it easy. So even if your employees get the value and they know that data is important, you can't expect them to do a great job with their time reporting if it's difficult or time consuming. And then the last area that's going to help get people on board is showing your people how they can use their own timesheets for personal benefits while performing their work. So let's go ahead and jump into these specifics, look at some examples of how you can accomplish these 3 things as part of a timesheet implementation process. Going back to a previous slide where we talked about why your organization needs to track time in the first place, you need to make sure everyone understands how timesheets will be used. If your employees understand what the data is for, it's going to help them to be more willing, essentially, to provide that data and provide it in an accurate fashion. If you don't take the time to explain what you're planning to do, your employees may fall back on some of these old ideas tied to like punch clocks, where time tracking, kind of had some kind of big brother connotation. Project-based employees are evaluated and reviewed based on their work product quality and ability to meet deadlines. So your timesheets aren't going to provide information where, to be used for employee review or performance. And if you make that clear to employees, that their timesheet data is not going to be used against them, it's going to assist with that acceptance and timesheet compliance. Now, when pitching the value of a new timesheet system, you might show them some examples, of how that data is going to be used, how it provides valuable information for things like tracking project profitability or resource capacity. As an example, their data from their timesheet might assist in showing that the company lacks resource capacity in their area, which would be good to know. And it can provide, evidence for, allocating more resources or providing more assistance to that group so that you avoid overworking that group and their cohorts. Paycheck accuracy is a really obvious benefit to pitch to employees. Prior to payroll automation and the advances we have here, some companies have required employees to turn in timesheets, before the time is actually worked. And so it requires people to guess what they're going to work on. Then, of course, corrections are almost always required in the future period if their guesses weren't correct. So, tracking time in the right system allows everyone to submit and get their timesheets processed quickly. So employees aren't playing this guessing game and then waiting for, corrected checks later on. That's just terrible. The billing verification case is pretty straightforward. As a person tracking time, I want to make sure that I get paid for the work that I completed for a customer. So it needs to be tracked and it needs to be billed, and that's really it. Now, even if your employees understand that their timesheets are going to help the company, a new process or system is going to be a tough sell if it's not easy to use. If you give users a timesheet with lots of selections that are hard to understand, project numbers they can't divine, you'll either end up with late timesheets, very inaccurate timesheets, or both. It's not that you can't be ambitious in terms of what information you want to capture and analyze. You can certainly work towards that ideal process where all the data is available for all the types of things that you want to do with it. However, it's important to expose your end users to as little complication and opportunity to make errors as is possible. So you can do this by automating some of the information that you track. So, some time entries that the end users don't even have to fill out completely. You can also set up rules that help your employees to catch errors before they submit those timesheets for review. Setting up rules to validate that data entered in the timesheets results in huge improvements for both employees and then supervisors and the payroll folks and everybody down the line. One of the most difficult parts of a timesheet process is making corrections to data that got through payroll, got through invoicing, whatever the case may be, but basically it has been used and used incorrectly. So most companies we've worked with have realized significant cost savings by making it easier for employees to send you that correct timesheet from the very beginning. So eliminating the corrections makes time tracking easier for absolutely everybody. In addition to timesheet configuration that automates and validates, so that minimizes those mistakes, you should also provide everyone with tools that make it really easy to enter their time. Ideally, these tools are offered, directly to the folks who are entering their time, so they can decide which ones best fit the way that they need to enter their time. And very, very important in this process is that that time should be entered only once in one place, not multiple times in multiple places. Very important to the ease of use. So now we move on to, okay, we've told you how this data is valuable. We've made it pretty easy for you to use, but there's another part of that most employees probably haven't considered, and that's how their own timesheet data can be a personal benefit and make their work easier. Tracking time, especially if it's done on a daily basis, can provide very useful information for managing and reporting on your own work. So for you and for your use. Most everyone has to provide a status report at some point or another. And when you pair that with what you're scheduled to do, a good timesheet provides a ready-made status report for just about any use. If I've kept up with entering my time throughout the week, I don't need to scroll through calendars and emails and everything else to prepare a report for my weekly status meeting, and that's pretty cool. Scheduling is also very closely related to tracking time, and it allows employees to plan for what they're assigned to do in the future. So ideally, you have a timesheet system that allows your employees to look at what they're scheduled to do in conjunction with what they've already done, of course, what they've completed, and that's on their timesheet. And so that scheduling information gives them all kinds of tools like that ability to plan time off around the requirements of their work. Another potential benefit is the ability to see where you're spending most of your time. So this isn't really about managers looking at your time or anything else, it's about you. So, if I look at my timesheet, are there administrative tasks or particular projects that are really eating up more of my time than they should be? So my timesheet can help me to identify, process areas maybe that aren't efficient or aren't working all that well. And it can help me to make the case for better tools or, additional resources, whatever is appropriate to correct that suck on my time so that I can move on to more productive work. And then, of course, the last thing that a time tracking system should provide is convenient access to those who are using it. The people using the system should have access at any time from any location where it makes sense for them to track their work. Basically, in a nutshell, it should fit into the way they do their work, not the other way around. So having looked at some of the reasons we track time and the general ways that we get people to track time, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Brian, and he's going to show you some specific examples of how a time tracking system can be designed to increase both ease of use and effectiveness.
All right, take it away, Brian.
All right, and thanks, Meredith, for the first part of the presentation there. So guys, as Meredith mentioned, I think we can all agree that tracking time and expense data is pretty critical, but you have to not only teach everybody why it's important and make it easy for them, but you really have to have the right system in place to be able to do that as well. So, some of the challenges with tracking time for Dynamics GP, you really sort of fall into one of, I would say, three categories. And one of those is maybe on an older version of GP, and I'm currently using Business Portal. And if I'm looking to upgrade to a newer version of GP, that's no longer going to be supported. The second scenario would be, well, I've already upgraded my GP, and I'm using some of the self-service or web apps to be able to track my time and expense data, but I've got some real challenges around capturing that data, especially around the end user experience. And I'd say the third scenario is we're using GP, but we're using some other system, and this is probably more of your sort of Excel spreadsheet or paper timesheet folks out there that are doing a lot of manual processing of that data to not only get that into GP, but also to do any sort of analytics or reporting around that. So when you're looking to be able to use the right system, that's when we're going to look to use a system like Journyx. You know, the biggest problem or thing that you're trying to accomplish with time and expense tracking is to make sure that that data is as accurate as possible and then it's done in a timely fashion. As Meredith mentioned previously in the presentation, typically the biggest hurdle around doing that is that people just don't like to track their time. So the key component of trying to increase the accuracy and timeliness of the time and expense data is to make the user experience as nice as possible. One of those is to have a very simple user interface for people to enter their time and hopefully try to limit the amount of clicks if moving around the screen that somebody needs to do to be able to enter their time and expense data. So this is where Journyx comes into play. We've got a really nice, clean, simple user interface for the end user. Many different attributes like limiting projects that people have access to, giving you the ability to create like a timesheet template for some of those projects and maybe cost categories that you work on a pretty regular basis. All the things in place to help improve the end user experience and again, help ensure that you've got timely and accurate time and expense entry. The second component of that is trying to, again, help ensure that the data is accurate. And that comes with what we call sort of a data validation entry features within Journyx. And basically what this allows you to do is enter in different business rules that helps validate the data that's being entered by the end user at the time that they're entering in that data into their time and expense sheet. What we hopefully allow this to do is not only cut down on some of the end user entry mistakes, but also help drastically cut down on any back-end user corrections that need to be done by your administrative or your accounting staff. In addition to tracking time on things like projects and cost categories, it's really important from a payroll processing standpoint to be able to accurately display and calculate end user accrual or time off balances. So that can be done directly within a system like Journyx. We can also integrate with your GP solution and pull that data in from either your GP solution or even in the case where you're using a third-party payroll solution like an ADP, we can pull that data in from that type of system as well. Now, in addition to displaying and calculating time off balances, it's also really important to give the end user and your management staff a good mechanism for requesting time off in advance. So Journyx basically allows your end users to be able to request time off in advance. It allows your management staff to be able to approve that leave request and look at a calendaring system to sort of make sure that you've got enough coverage on a certain day. And if the manager were to go in and approve the leave request, it would actually populate that directly onto the employee's timesheet. And so getting back to improving the end user experience, they would not have to re-enter that time off onto their timesheet for a second time. Now, as important as it is for entering in time in a simple and easy fashion, that same thing applies to expenses. So Journyx allows you to track both your time and expense data all in one place, which gets back to Meredith's point about being able to enter in all of your data in one location. So I don't have to enter in my time in one piece of self-service and my expenses in a different area of self-service. Being able to enter in all of my time and expense data in one location really improves that end user experience. Now, a couple of important things around tracking expenses, not only to be able to track that very simply and easily, but also the ability to support multiple currencies, being able to attach receipt images through the web user interface, also through a mobile app that's available through Journyx, but also being able to integrate and pull in any of your credit card statements. So a lot of your credit card companies and banks out there will provide you with a file of all of the transactions that you can actually upload into Journyx and then just associate that to the appropriate projects. So again, being able to capture your time and expense data in one location and do that in a very efficient and simple manner is very important to having that accuracy and timeliness of that data going on the upcheck. I mentioned this briefly a moment ago, but in addition to capturing time and expense data through the web interface, we at Journyx offer a mobile app for allowing you to capture time and expenses and also do approvals through the mobile app for both Androids and iPhones at this point in time. If you're talking about tracking expenses, you can take a picture of your receipt and actually upload that receipt image through the mobile app and have that feed into the actual Journyx application. So this is really important for, most of the time people have their phone in front of their face all day, especially if you're out there in the field as a field services organization, or maybe you're in the airport trying to kill time from a business trip. It's very, very nice to have as many options as possible for entering in this time and expense data. One of the biggest problems that people have from an administrative standpoint is trying to get timesheets collected on time. We've touched a great deal on the end user experience to help aid with that, but many times people get into the timesheet hunting process at the end of the period, right when they're trying to pay people or bill customers or measure their cost on projects. Many administrative staff spend a lot of time trying to hunt down those timesheets. So with Journyx, we provide you with several different tools, one of them being this compliance tool that we're looking at here. But essentially what this allows you to do, along with email notifications and reminders to your end users, is use these types of tools to give you a good picture of whose timesheets do we have in on time, who are we still waiting on, and also a couple different methods for contacting and communicating with both those employees and the managers to make sure the timesheets get done on time and that they're accurate, so those can be processed for those different accounting functions. I touched on this briefly, but if you're gonna, let's say the end user experience is really nice and pleasant, you've got some data validation rules in place, people are submitting their time and expense sheets on time, you're probably still gonna run into those cases where there's some corrections that need to be made. So it's really important to provide the accounting staff with a really nice and clean and easy way to do prior period corrections. And so if you need to correct time and expense records, even after they've been fed into the accounting system like GP, it's really nice to give the accounting staff a simple way to do those prior period corrections so they don't have to go through a lot of manual steps and processes to be able to fix that data before you send it back into GP. I mentioned at the beginning of my part here, really it comes down to getting accuracy and timeliness of all of this data. And so it's really important to be able to collect all that from a time and expense entry standpoint, but it's also very important to be able to report on that data. So Journyx provides you with a really flexible and customizable reporting engine that essentially allows you to report in real time against any of that time or expense data that's been entered, also against any sort of cost type reporting, where you're essentially multiplying cost and billable rates times the hours worked to give you a better picture of your billable utilization, your project costing, your project profitability, all again in real time and at the hands of your management staff, so they don't have to come and bug everybody in accounting or get access to GP to be able to get that data. So again, here's just some examples of running reports on hours. Here's just some examples of running some profitability type reporting. If you're talking about invoicing your customer, it would be nice to have the backup information that you need to be able to stick that behind your invoice. So we're talking about your hours, your costs, your billable amount, your expenses, but also any of the backup documentation for that, like your receipt images that you can include with the reports that can be stuck behind the invoice. Resource planning, resource capacity planning is also something that's very important when you're talking about doing time and sort of project management. So Journyx allows you to do sort of resource planning, resource capacity planning on top of your sort of basic standard time and expense tracking as well. And then being able to integrate Journyx with all of your other critical business systems. So here at Journyx, we have the idea of really being able to integrate with your whole suite of Microsoft type solutions. One of them being integrating Journyx directly with Excel. You know, a lot of people use Excel to do a lot of reporting analytics. And so Journyx says we've developed an Excel plugin essentially with our report link solution that allows us to directly connect Excel with Journyx and do a lot of the analytics that you're doing in Excel without having to manually run reports and export those every time you want to update them. This allows you to take advantage of the full suite of functionality within Excel, from pivot table reporting to worksheet reporting, but then also being able to take advantage of all the charts and graphs and dashboarding that you can do in Excel, again, with the click of one button to update those all at one time. Of course, we have sort of an off-the-shelf integration with GP, and that can be standalone GP, it can be with project accounting, and essentially our account link for GP solution allows you to have a bi-directional integration between GP and Journyx. And by that, I mean we can pull in any of your projects, cost categories, your people, pay codes, bill codes, all from GP into Journyx. And then as we capture our time and expense data within Journyx and send that through the approval workflow process, we can then send that time and expense data from Journyx back into GP. So again, you can do your project cost accounting, invoice your customers, and pay your employees. In addition to, as I mentioned, integrating with GP and project accounting, of course with Excel as well, to continue with the same line of integrating with some of your other Microsoft products, we have the ability to integrate bidirectionally with MS Project. We do interface with Canadian payroll for some of our Canadian customers out there, but also with different CRM systems, HR systems, any third-party payroll systems that I mentioned before, like an ADP or a Paychex. But then we also do provide a very mature and robust web services API. So if you need to be able to push and pull data in and out of Journyx, we provide you with the tools to be able to do that either on your own or to sort of work with our professional services team to be able to integrate Journyx with your critical business systems. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Carrie. And Carrie's going to introduce one of my favorite people out there, Sandra Dodge from Iridium, to just sort of share her experience about using Journyx with GP.
Great, thank you, Brian. And Sandra, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, you're welcome anytime.
All right. So I just have a few questions to ask you, and wanted to start out first. If you could talk a little bit about the problem you were having with your need to replace Business Portal. I believe this was a few years ago that you were talking. You came across this problem that we've been talking about today.
Yes, that's correct. So Brian laid it out with his scenarios for why you would change, but we upgraded GP and we had a problem. We thought we could upgrade Business Portal ourselves, and we had various technical issues with that, and we found out that it was not compatible. You couldn't upgrade it, and there was no support. So it was going to cost us a small fortune to try to find someone to help us upgrade Business Portal to keep our timesheet solution working.
Okay, so then when you began looking for solutions, what specific needs did you have?
So our number one requirement was that it needed to be a tight solution with GP and project accounting. So when you set up project accounting in GP, you grant people access to certain projects, and we needed all of that information to be available in our timesheet solution.
And were there, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sandra.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say we actually looked at GP
and what they had out there for this, and they didn't, the GP solution they were offering didn't integrate with project. It didn't allow us any flexibility in time periods. It didn't, wasn't configurable in any fashion. It just didn't capture enough data.
Okay, and so that's basically how GP fell short for your needs, and so that that precipitated the need for a third-party solution.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And so when we went looking for it, those were our requirements. We needed it to be able to do project accounting, to integrate with GP, and as a bonus, it'd be really nice if it'd fix our PTO accrual, automate our PTO accruals for us, which we were doing manually, and have a nice user interface. Those were sort of our wish list.
Okay, great. So why specifically did you decide to use to go with Journyx?
Sure, because Journyx did everything we needed at the right price. It allowed us. They were experienced with GP and project integrations. The PTO accruals were easy to understand, use, set up. They work the employees. It was a real bonus for us for the employees to discover they could view what they had available. It tapped into the GP project access security. There were robust notifications, many notifications, and the ability for us to customize them. It was available outside the domain. So this business portal, you had to be essentially logged into your network to get to. And timesheet solution from Journyx did not require that, which has been a great bonus for us in getting timesheets on time. It's easy to configure for various business needs. And I think probably my favorite feature is when one of our employees logs in, they get the screen they're supposed to enter their data on pops up, and it's intuitive. There's a 5-minute training exercise was all this required.
That's great. So it sounds like Journyx has worked well for you, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the kinds of results that you've seen. Maybe one thing you mentioned was it's easier, or employees are submitting their timesheets on time, which is, by the way, one of the biggest challenges that GP users just like you have. In fact, it's the top challenge, getting employees to submit timesheets on time.
Yeah.
Because they hate to do it, but this has made it easier for them. So can you tell us a little bit more about what other results that you've seen from using Journyx?
Sure. So, and by the way, one of the reasons we get them on time now is because the second email they get says, "Hey, you blew it," and it goes to their boss. So we've had some fun with that. No, we like the report link. We can get the data out. People can monitor whatever it is. So payroll guy, our payroll team monitors certain rules and things, and they use report link to tell who hasn't submitted yet. But of course, that is also available inside the system. Our project managers also really like Journyx, and we're in the midst of doing some work for them. So we like the product so much we're expanding its use. We've recently started requiring all of our contractors to enter their time in as well. And so we'll have all of the hourly data by project in one place. We started off with 250 employee license, and we're up to 450. We really do like this product a lot.
That's great to hear. And Sandra, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just going to escape out of here very quickly because I'm going to see if we have any questions for our panel today. We do have a couple of questions. So first of all, does Journyx, Brian, you were talking about a bidirectional sync, so maybe you can clarify this. It directly syncs the data to GP, or is it handled by importing a file?
Yeah, so we have, I don't know, probably 7-8 years ago, we built this integration tool that we call Account Link for GP. And it's using a combination of SQL queries and web services and eConnect to actually pull and push data between GP and Journyx. So we're not using flat files, but more of an automated process. And so you can schedule this account link for GP tool to run on an ongoing basis. You can also run this tool on demand.
Okay, great, thank you. And we do have another question. Does the expense entry work only with GP project accounting?
You do not need to use project accounting to track time and or expenses within Journyx. So no, it's not required. You can send expense data over to GP without using the project accounting module.
Okay, great. I don't think that we have any other questions today, so we will end a little bit early. But thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our presenters, Brian Maxin and Meredith Zachritz of Journyx, and Sandra Dodge. Thank you again for telling us your story about Journyx and about your how you were able to solve your problem with Business Portal as well using Journyx. And again, this will be recorded, or this has been recorded, and we will be providing the recording. So thank you for coming, and watch for that in your inbox. And have a great day, everyone.